Good morning, everybody. If I could have your attention, thank you so much for being here this morning at Temple Beth. We're very excited to present this program. This is a program offered by IJKL. If you're not sure what IJKL is, the Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning, we offer a dozen classes every single week, virtual classes, some are hybrid classes, and we would love for you to be a part of it. Please feel free to talk to me or any of the staff following. But without further ado, I would like to introduce one of the sponsors of IJKL, and together with Kim Lerner, one of the sponsors of this morning's program. I'd like to call him the Chief Rabbi of Broward County, where Rabbi Arnie Samlin is in fact the Chief Education Officer, same thing, of Broward County, to say a few words of introduction. I would also like to recognize the Rabbi of Temple Beth, or Rabbi Stephen Snyderman as well.
So first of all, I always love it when Rabbi Goldman calls me the Chief Rabbi of Broward. I'm definitely not, but I enjoy it anyways. Appreciate the promotion. It is an honor to be here. It is on behalf of Jewish Federation. It is really a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to partner with IJKL and to partner in this program. Having heard Nir in the past, I can tell you that you're in for a tremendous treat. And as I was saying to you earlier, the timing could not have been more perfect, because all of our hearts and minds and souls are together with Israel and the Middle East and everything going on. And the juxtaposition of your visit, of your very timely presentation of Purim and the historical interface between Persia and the Jewish people back in the day and the Iran-American-Israeli situation today. It's just like a perfect synergy between all of the above. So we're honored to be a partner with IJKL, honored to partner with Broward Central Synagogue / Temple Beth Or, and just really a pleasure to be a part of this. And thank you so much for being part of this vibrant Jewish community and this wonderful activity. So thank you, sir.
I can hear you. There's no, you can all hear us?
We can hear you.
That's good. The mic doesn't.
It's on, but it's not, the volume's not up real high. Yeah.
The camera angle is also a little weird in that we're seeing a lot of your, like when you come up close, we're just seeing people from their neck, from their chin to their belt.
We are going to try to do our best, okay?
Okay,
Nir,
thanks.
come. So let's welcome Nir.
Are we okay with the camera?
Yeah, there will be, the camera will do its job, okay? And you're not super tall, okay?
That's the advantage.
That's good. That's the advantage, Nir. So thank you once again for allowing us to have this conversation, Nir. And Nir also has a presentation for some of the topics that we are going to cover. But the idea when this interview and this class was thought, it changed with the reality, okay? So we are going to update the conversation with more proper things of what's going on exactly today, now in Iran. So Nir, just to start, for everybody to know you more, where does your expertise come from? Where do you live? From where are you going to share all this information this morning?
Rabbi, thank you. Kim, thank you. And thank you very much for everyone here who came. It's certainly an interesting time to be speaking. I mean, I come from Jerusalem. I'm a professor of Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University. I should do that. There you go. I'm a professor of Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University. I've spent probably about half of my life engaging with Jews and Muslims, Israeli and Arabs. Been very involved in a number of operations and activities related to our immediate circle meaning Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, and also the Abraham Accords. My PhD deals with Syria and Iran, and I've been involved in the last decade in this interesting operation called Good Neighbors, where Israel actually hosted over 5,000 Syrian injured people, and then headed a humanitarian operation that reached 1.5 million Syrians on the other side. And a lot of my work, sometimes I call it parallel diplomacy, meaning I'm not an official, but I've been very much involved, and I'm working currently on a number of tracks dealing with partners and colleagues from the other side who believe that we need to create a different future in the Middle East for our children.
So thank you, Nir. I think it's always good to know when somebody's talking to us from where does their Torah, their knowledge, the information in their lives come from. And so my first question this morning will be, we're going to be talking about the Middle East, okay? What defines the Middle East? Okay, what is the definition of the Middle East? And a more proper question is, in which way Israel is part of the Middle East and in which way it's not?
Well, the Middle East is, broadly speaking, a British term. When you're looking at a particular time from where the UK is, then it's in the middle. If you're looking at the Far East, and in a way, that's how the Middle East was, received its name. But from our perspective, this is really our neighborhood. And it's not, and there are other names. Sometimes we say MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, because the immediate neighborhood, or the Levant, which is the area of mainly Lebanon, Syria, Israel. And then really, when you're looking at countries like Egypt or Morocco that were very much relevant both to the peace process and also the Abraham Accords, this is really taking us to North Africa. The Gulf, again, is a little south, and related to the connection between, again, if you're looking at the British connection, between India and Europe, this is why there were colonial interests there. And that's also become a part of us. So all of these old frameworks eventually became a part of I would say, the literature. But it's interesting because for so many years, if you're looking at, if you go to Amazon, or if you go to a bookstore and you ask, give me 10 books on the Middle East conflict, 9 of them would be about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as there is almost nothing else matters. What we're seeing now is perhaps one of the largest conflagrations, wars, which is a regional war in the Middle East. Of course, Israel is very much related to it, the Palestinians much less so. And perhaps we can speak a little bit more of how all of this has changed.
Amazing. So let's put the context in the geography, okay? What part of the world we're talking about, and what's the connection between the very small Israel and the very big Iran in terms of geography, population. We are talking about Israel around 10 million people, Iran around 90-something million people, vast territory. And now another question that is to set the frame in time, not in place, in time. We will all remember 2 dates, I think, in the next couple of years. October 7th and the last morning of this last Saturday with this last war. What's the connection, if there is, between what happened and started on October 7 and what's developing today in the most recent news in the last 4 or 5 days?
Well, thinking about this, I was looking again at the tale of two cities. So Charles Dickens speaks about the best of time and the worst of time between London and Paris. And in this week of Purim, we can perhaps think about the same analogy between Susa, the old city of Shushan, which is located still, we can find it a fairly large and important city, about 600 kilometers from Tehran, on the Iraqi border, and let's say Jerusalem. The connection between Iran and Israel is something that we just got a reminder of just yesterday. Reading the Megillah and remembering Cyrus the Great, and remembering Esther and Mordechai, and a very important and proud Jewish community that existed there. But the connection between these times and this time are to some degree becomes also relevant in the context of the perpetual struggle between those who are our friends and those who are our enemies. This Purim, I think, in just about every synagogue, the rabbi had to make one variation of this analogy, whether this is Haman and Amalek, or whether what we're trying to do, if you want to look at it from a different perspective, with Mordechai and the king, is sort of something along the lines of the Abraham Accords. We have to remember also something that we often forget, that we tend to think that the Iranians, who happens to be Shias, are a perpetual enemy of the Jewish people. Again, in the time of Persia, that was not always true, but also in modern times, it was not always true. We can tell some fascinating stories, certainly before 79, before the Iranian Revolution, in where, of course, Iran and Israel had very good relationships. But not only that, when Jews were in trouble in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, where did they escape to? Of course, to safe haven in Iran. We still have people who remember these relationships, who tell these stories about these relationships, who were there, before 1979. And also we have very good relationships with what we call the Iranian people, which means before we get into work with Iranian opposition groups, which now is becoming more relevant, but it's also part of the fact that relations. In 1979, something happened, not just in Iran, in the Middle East at large. There is an attempt now to undo a big part of what is called the Iranian Revolution. But this has been an existential threat, certainly more recently to Israel. And if I were to zoom out from another perspective, I'll give you the following. We're speaking about conflict. And we speak about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and sometimes when I teach about this, I'd like to say, well, there are two circles. There's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that we hear about, and then the Israeli-Arab conflict. They're not the same. They're not the same because if you're looking at the Israeli-Arab conflict, broadly, it's not that we have ended it, but it's in a very different place. We have peaceful relationship with Jordan, with Egypt, now with the 4 countries of the Abraham Accords, with the Palestinians. We have other cordial relationships with a number of other Arab and Muslim countries. I am personally involved with very interesting, what we call track to work, parallel diplomacy, speaking with Lebanese, speaking with Syrians, speaking with Indonesians, speaking with Pakistanis. There are more. That doesn't mean that we are coming to terms with the Palestinians, when we're looking at it's the best of times and the worst of times, right? So we are, on the one hand, we are in the midst of a very difficult war that takes our attention. But if we were not having that this week, we would focus on the board of peace that just happened. We were focused on Gaza. We would focus on the coming elections in Lebanon. We perhaps have a whole different framework because the Middle East is busy with many other issues, and it's important to put them in context. And so Iran became an existential threat because of the Islamic Revolution. And the same Iranians who were friends now are controlled by a party that's made them enemies. The Shias, who are for us associated with the Iranian Revolution or with Hezbollah, emerged actually in Egypt over 1,000 years ago. And out of the Shias emerged the Sufis, who are usually considered the more moderate wing, and the more spiritual, Kabbalistic. The Druze, who are probably familiar to some of you, many of them serve in the Israeli army. The Baha'is, one of the most peaceful religions in the world. So it's not that the Shias are essentially theologically can be a threat. No. And this is part of also an interesting theological discussion that also takes place in the Middle East, not just amongst the Iranians, but also amongst other scholars. What are we doing with this vision of God? What are we doing with religion? And can we find a way that this leads us not necessarily to conflict, but possibly to reconciliation? A lot of these conversations have happened in the Middle East. Some of them actually manifested, not just from the religious perspective, but also from the political perspective, in the framework of the Abraham Accords, of countries who began to say, we need to go to a different path. We need to educate our people to a different path because we're seeing some dangers. Radicalization is dangerous. Now we're seeing the price of that danger.
Nir, let me take you to the story that we read yesterday and Monday night of the story of Purim. At the chapter 8, it says that there was a fear among the Persians because of the power of Mordechai. Okay, is that also what Israel is trying to do in the Middle East? Create this superpower of technology, of surveillance, that if it's the next leader of Hezbollah, he has 24 hours to be alive. The next Ayatollah will be, well, maybe 48 hours at the most, and the superpower with like airplanes and anti-missiles and everything. Is this the strategic new Israel, not to try to get peace for peace, but peace through force?
Well, this is a very important question. And again, we need to look at this in a bit of a historical context. First of all, what you just outlined behind your question lies an actual very serious critique that Israelis hear, or we hear from our friends in the region, who on the one hand are at awe with some of what we're able to achieve, how we're able to sell Hezbollah the system that eventually will lead to their demise, how we're able to, again, according to some reports, know Iran like the palm of our hand, understanding where the driver of Khomeini may now take somebody for a meeting with the others, so we know exactly when they meet and we know exactly where to bomb, how we are able to find the leaders wherever they are, in whatever country they are, and with a precision level, able to get into their window and their room, as we did with Ismail Haniyeh, and take them without disturbing their neighbor across the corridor. But there's danger in doing this as well. There is an awe, but there's also a danger, and the danger is that if you want to have a friendly relationship, we should perceive it not as a threat and not just using force. And this dilemma of when kinetics and when diplomacy begins will escort us. It will escort us now as well, as we maybe have a divergence of strategies between Israel and the United States. You hear sometimes that there may be a Venezuela model in mind. Let's take perhaps Ali Larijani, somebody who was this secretary of the Supreme Council, who is still alive. Maybe he could be taking the place of nowadays we have maybe another supreme leader, but we have an agreement, and then we are keeping the old system, making sure that it's not going to collapse completely, but really under control of the United States. Or maybe we're trying now to speak about arming resistant groups and going to Tehran and creating a street type of a campaign that will be able to get all of the system away. I'm not yet sure where this will head. But certainly Israel has been playing more of hardball, and that relates very much so to October 7th. Because October 7th was a trauma. And I can even say this personally. I mean, of course, I was there. Not only I was there, I was mobilized in uniform, and I spent the first 7 months after October 7th in the Gaza envelope, in the Gaza division. I've seen a lot of it with my own eyes. And it certainly, I mean, it was a trauma, it was also a failure, but it was translated of like, now we cannot really take a chance. We don't believe Syria, we don't believe Lebanon, we certainly don't believe Iran. And we're going to show them that the Israeli deterrence is back. It was successful, but again, there is always a dilemma when kinetics end and when diplomacy begins. And I hope that we'll be able to find the right balance. I, for one, certainly believe that when you engage, you don't do it just with kinetics. And eventually, I would say we have some friends out there, certainly in Iran and in other parts of the Middle East, who would like to see a different future. And I will just end this section by saying the following. I want you to imagine, not the average Israeli for a second, because that you may know, because you have been here when other moments of tensions and wars and conflicts have been. But imagine the person now in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Oman. And some of them, certainly the countries like, like United Arab Emirates or Bahrain, they've signed the Abraham Accords. They went with the United States, they went with Israel. Now they're paying for it. They don't have a shelter. They hardly have an alarm. They don't really have where to hide. I have a friend who wrote about 6 weeks ago an interesting article. He's from Bahrain. And he was tracking how many bomb shelters are there in UAE and in Bahrain. I think he found 93 bomb shelters, military installments, and then 50 something in Bahrain, which basically means in Israel, of course, you have one in every house, which basically means that when something happens, you can go to the staircase, you can go somewhere, you don't have where to go. And now they're paying the price to some degree. We went with the Abraham Accords, we went with the United States, and now we're bombed. And that's a dilemma. So what are we doing? Until this war began, some of them, they tried to hedge. They had an embassy in Iran. They were trying to, we're going to say, listen, we're going to work with Iran to make sure that we're not going to be a part of this war. The Iranian strategy was to make them part of this war, mainly as a pressure point, because you already see it in your gas pump, and they wanted to close the Straits of Hormuz. They did that, at least partially, certainly from the insurance perspective, but now this move is not going to last very long after the majority of the Iranian fleet was basically destroyed. But they did that in order to pressure the United States, using allies to say, listen, this is too much, just end this war. They've taken a risk, or they had joined something that now they pay the price for. But part of that is a question about the future. And there are two scenarios. Either they says, listen, we are paying too much for this, perhaps we should just engage with the Iranians. But if the Iranians are losing, maybe there's another route, which is certainly preferred for many of us, which is, let's not make it happen again. We cannot live with neighbors who are able and capable to use ideology combined with weapons and just destroy everything around it.
Going into this, that many of us were surprised on Saturday night, Sunday, the first couple of days, we can understand how maybe Iran will attack Israel. We were expecting that, like it happened in June. We can understand how Iran will attack different bases of the US in the region, but we saw many attacks that were not intended to those bases only, but also civilian infrastructure in Oman, in Kuwait, in all of that. But also up until today, if I'm not mistaken, and if I am, please correct me, Nir, all of those Gulf countries, Sunnis, not Shiites, they have not responded to Iran yet. The question is, why they haven't done it? And can we expect a change? And if that change, how it's going to happen or because of what?
So this is another very important point, and I want you to pay attention also to the numbers. Iran so far had launched over 200 ballistic missiles toward Israel, and about 500 drones. But the number of missiles and drones that were launched at Gulf states is almost 4 times as many. There are two reasons for it. One, it's easier to do it with short-term missiles. They have more of them. in the estimates is that coming into this war, they have between 1,500 and 2,000 long-term ballistic missiles. So they're trying to keep some of them as they're preparing the campaign so they can continue to put some pressure. So it's easier to use short-term missiles. But I also mentioned to you that the strategy was they understand that there is a military inferiority. The old Russian planes they have cannot cope with F-35s. The Navy.
It just happened right yesterday. The first one in the history that was shot off by a plane.
Yes, by an Israeli.
By Israeli
in
plane.
40 years. But 2 days ago, it's happened in an interesting way that Kuwait also took two
Friendly fire.
Kuwait took two Iranian, but Kuwait also with friendly fire hit tragically America. But Kuwait also took Qatar also took down two Iranian pilots. So the strategy of the Gulf countries vis-a-vis Iran, and I've heard this when we had these very deep discussions with our friends, and they told me, listen, Nir, we have been their neighbors for over 1,500 years. We know how to handle them. There is a sentence in Arabic, أهلا وسهلا يا جاري أنت بدارك وعنا بداري, which means, hello, my dear neighbor, glad to see you. You are here, I'm there. I don't always like my neighbor, but I know how to handle this. The Gulf countries, when after the last round of conflicts, and we've had some also internal Gulf divisions between, for example, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But what we've seen is that the Emiratis chose to engage, the Saudis chose to engage. They put an embassy in Iran. There are over 5,000 Iranian companies operating in Dubai. That's irrespective of the regime. This is business. Not only that, if you're looking at the population, the demographics, there's probably over a third of the Emiratis that are of Iranian descent. And that has to do with the tribal structure and mainly women. And certainly at a time where sometimes there was you can have more than one wife. They would take wives from the neighboring countries, and Iran was there. So these are neighbors. They know each other. They know how to handle each other. And the strategy was, they understand there is a conflict. They understand there may be some looming war. They have seen the previous rounds, including I was in Abu Dhabi when we killed Yahya Sinwar. Ismail Haniyeh, when we bombed Iran, when we bombed him in Iran. And I remember, and I was there speaking when we had the attack against the rest of the headquarters, when we were trying to take the rest of them, and it failed. And I remember, my Emirati said, you know what, we don't sure we like it, but I hope you hit them. And the same token, they said, listen, we don't want to get involved in this conflict. So it's better for us to have an embassy there and to engage with them, because we want to keep ourselves out. We need to hedge. This particular war had brought this into a junction. Either you're with us or you're not. The Iranians have also gambled on, they went to the casino and they put everything on the table. They bombed Turkey yesterday. And they bombed Jordan, and they bombed the largest number of drones and missiles were aimed at Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and then Bahrain, and then Kuwait, and then Qatar. I think some of it was shocking for them. Their strategy and the American allyship and the military bases are supposedly there to defend them, not to make them a target. But I think since the Iranians chose an either-or strategy, they're getting an either-or strategy back. And if I'm putting myself in the mind of some of the Gulf partners, they're basically saying this, look, we need to put an end to this. I remember this question regarding Hezbollah. People will say, have told us, certainly also before October 7, okay, but they're deterred. And when I ask him, what's the difference between a collection of stamps and a collection of missiles? Well, the main difference that at some point, right, you take them to the exhibition, right? You're doing this collection, and at some point you do something with it, and missiles makes a bit more noise. You're not putting them just for show. At some point, there is a danger that you're going to put them actually to be launched. And the main danger for that is that we know that at some point it will happen. And the Lebanese need it. And the Gulf partners need it. And now, I believe that they are very much in understanding and in an agreement that we have to end this. Because we cannot allow ourselves to get into a situation where our entire infrastructure, our economy, our reputation. Dubai is the safest place in the world. That's how they market it. It's the place that you go there to do business. It's the place that you can be who you can be Jewish, you can be Muslim, you can be Christian, you can be Baha'i, you can go. There are people there from 190 nations, and they are inviting people, and they're being very successful at this because they created an economic model that is actually not based on oil. The Iranians are now trying to destroy all of this. When we are looking at the future, we cannot allow this type of threats to live amongst us in the Middle East. And therefore, when you hear now that the Saudis may join, that some of the other Gulf countries may join, tacitly or not, they've done some of this already before. They were a part of the coalition, for the safety, for the security of the Red Sea.
So we have talked about the Gulf countries and this strategy of Iran, of deterrence, especially of the US, and put pressure over the US, attacking countries that cannot defend themselves. And with all the money that those countries are paying and giving to the US in different venues to say, do something or do not extend the war. And we assume that the US and many superpowers understood that long wars are not worthy, okay, for economic reasons, for political reasons. But the other question is, okay, we talk about the Gulf countries. Let's talk about now how, with another term from the Megillah that we read the last couple of days, Benafohu, and everything changed. The scenario of now, March 2026, is very different from October 7. Then you have not only a powerful Iran, you have all the proxies, all the satellites of the Ayatollah's regime, the Houthis in Yemen. Now they have been almost not existent in the last couple of days. Then you have in Syria, Assad, he's gone, exiled in Russia. Then you have in Lebanon, and now in Lebanon, the president of Lebanon putting pressure of Hezbollah of not attacking Israel. So the reality in all those countries that also Iran used not to attack by themselves, but through others, to the state of Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, some forces in Iraq, or even also Hezbollah in Syria, or the Houthis in Yemen, apparently they are super deterred, and even Hamas, okay? In Gaza, no missiles from them, very little from the north, from Lebanon, even with pressure of the same government of Lebanon. How can we understand this change of powers in only 2.5 years? That is a blink of an eye in history.
Well, it's a blink of an eye, but it relates to very, very significant kinetic activities in all these 7 different fronts. And I want to take your point and give it another historical perspective. The War of Independence was the longest war in Israeli history until fairly recently, and until the October 7 war, the Gaza war had become slightly longer. It was 22 months in 1948. And until we had the ceasefire, the Gaza war is roughly 24 months. These 2 wars are interesting comparison from another perspective. Every Israeli knows that in 1948, we were fighting 7 different fronts. We were fighting 7 different Arab armies, and we prevailed. Because we were fighting from Lebanon, we were fighting from Egypt, we had Iraqis joining the Egyptians, we were fighting the Jordanians, we were fighting, of course, the Arab. And we had all 7 fronts around Israel and other Arab countries, and we prevailed. We also had 7 fronts in the Gaza war. They were not exactly the same because the Yemenites, let's say, were not there in 1940, but they were there. And here is the interesting difference. We had 7 fronts here and we had 7 fronts there. We have 7 Arab fronts in 1948, not even 1 Arab front in the Gaza war. We were not fighting Arab militaries. On the contrary, when Arab militaries came into the fight, they did it under CENTCOM, and I'm talking about the activities of some of the Gulf countries and the Jordanians who helped then, and us they're helping now, they're not participating, but they're helping to probe and take down some of the missiles that came from Iran against Israel. And if you're looking at this perspective for a second, this is a sea change. Because I mentioned to you the Israeli-Arab conflict that is not a complete circle yet. It's not completely sorted. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we can get to that. It's a different story. But the Israeli-Arab conflict is very much relates to this point and to the point that you just made. And part of that is also an understanding that when you're looking at the map of the Middle East and the conflict, again, the animosity between Sunni and Shia, especially in the context of an theological, ideological regime of the Iranian Revolution, you see this in everything they put. You see this in the curriculum. I'll give you an interesting example. And again, this is not from now. When you open the Iranian curriculum, 10th grade, if I'm not mistaken, one of the chapters that's being taught is about the heroic Iranian-Iraqi war. It was almost a 9-year war following the rise of Saddam Hussein, and really shortly after the Ayatollah rose to power. Saddam Hussein came a few years earlier, and the Iranians had a military that was deficient in many ways, and one of the things they did not have is engineering tools in order to go and take down the Iraqi mines. But they found a very interesting and innovative way to clear those minefields, those Iraqi minefields. Anybody remember? They used children. Not only they used children, they are very proud at this. And every child learns that 36,000 Iranian children wearing keychains as the stairway to heaven have given their lives to the Holy Revolution. And that rings back to Hussein, to Ali, we're not going to get into all of that, but that's like the genesis of Shia Islam. And that mindset is part and parcel of the Iranian Revolution. And that same mindset gets the Gulf countries to say, we want something different. Because that leads us to a perpetual, uncompromising war in where death is something that is sanctified. And this was Iranians who developed this method of suicide bomb. When you study on the early terrorism, you see that, and again, afterwards the Palestinians are taking it to another level, but it started with the proxies. And the Iranians would send all these proxies, and they would send them to die. And that's a part of a very old conflict that became a part of a new conflict, and now becomes a point of change in where the Gulf partners are saying, if we're already here, we would like to see a different ending from there, because this is a threat not just to Israel, it's a threat to us.
I have 2 more questions, and then we will open for questions that maybe people on Zoom or in person they have for you, Nir. In all these circles that you describe, right? We talk about MENA, the Middle East in general. Then we talk about all the Gulf countries and this interaction with the war, defense, not attack, this difficult decision that they have. And we talk about how all the proxies that Iran had, funded with money and with weapons, It changed completely since October 7 and the deterrence of the state of Israel. Now, my next question, the last one more after this, is the following. What's going on now? Let's go to Iran. Okay, let's understand now, Saturday morning, all the heads of political and military were overturned in just a few seconds after months of years of preparations. Who are the players in the ground of Iran? Because something that history taught us is that the war, even though that Israel and the US have totally air superiority in Iran, that they can do whatever they cannot overturn the government only by air. So who are the players inside Iran that can change the game?
All right. So in the first 48 hours of the war, Israel takes about 50 of the core leadership roles in Iran, including the Minister of Defense, and of course the Supreme Leader, the most loyal advisors, the head of air defense, the heads of Revolutionary Guard, and a list of many others that eventually prompts the Iranians and the Revolutionary Guards to try and create an interim council and another, according to the latest report, the Supreme Leader, who is the son of the former Supreme Leader. And that report is now they're trying to be a bit more careful. Unlike Nasrallah, Khamenei, 86 years old, was acting a bit differently. He functioned more on above ground than below ground. Nasrallah barely went out from the bunker. Sometimes he had a speech, for a few minutes and then go back down. He understood exactly the danger. For Khamenei, he probably understood this, and probably some of the people around him told him this, but he took less proportions. And part of that was, I am a part of the revolution, so if I need to sacrifice my life, I will. It's in a way more of a theological view, but also probably a fatal mistake that they've done, because now we understand what was done there. I mean, of course, the Israelis have certainly handled what is happening in Iran, whether it was from security cameras and from internal information, and that has to do with your question of what's happening inside Iran. Now, there are really two wars. There is the war that's happening right now, which is mainly a war for the air. And then there is another part of this campaign, and I have to do it more gently, because this is also where there may be a divergence between what Israel has in mind and what the US has in mind. That has to do with what may happen next. There is probably a broad consensus that if we're looking at what we had seen in the past few days, that's probably a good exclamation point of why this system is a danger and it needs to go. Because we don't want to have another generation of a system that continues to accumulate missiles, not to mention non-conventional weapons, and that can pose a danger. And just imagine if we would have done the same thing, with this type of approach, when they're willing to basically put missiles on neighbors, including on civilian installations, not just with conventional, but also with non-conventional. So we got to put an end to it. And then how do we put an end to it? So there is opposition. And in this country, for sure, you hear about Prince Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah. That became a very important symbol and actually a very important voice in all of this. But being a voice and being visible and going on media does not necessarily mean that you have the ability to lead the revolution from the street. And here you basically have two models. One is the Venezuela model, in where you put the credible threat, you put the hand, and you basically say, listen, even what I've done, I'm there. Work with me, We're going to keep some of the system intact, but we're going to eventually create transitions. We're not going to break everything because we don't want to repeat the mistake of Iraq when you're basically breaking everything and then everything remains broken. And the second option, and there may be a hybrid between them, which is there are serious opposition forces. The Iranians, after over 30,000 protesters that were again killed, and not for the first time, and there was brutal. And if you've seen some of these pictures of the body bags, you have people, and I actually prepared some of these voices, in my presentation, that at some point I can share with you. You could see the Iranians are saying, please come and help us take them out. So it's not clear that even if you leave the system in, that the Iranian people will be able to live with it. And there are certainly people who are pushing for a more radical change. Let's get them out. But in order to get them out, you are right, it's not enough to bomb from above. You need people who are formidable in the streets who would say, we're going to take the palace.
So why it happened like 2-3 weeks ago, 1 month ago, all these protests, and now that the help came, okay, you do not see it so much?
I think it's a matter of timing. I mean, at this point, first of all, there is a certain monopoly on weapons in Iran. The minority groups, the Kurds, the Baluchis are more organized. They have weapons, and they're there to protect themselves, first of all. And if you have seen in the past few days, again, it's not something that you would see here just generally in the media, but I'll just highlight for a second. You see that their territories are more safe and more secure, and that there has been, of course, these territories also have military bases of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but they are able to say, these are the coordinates, then their bases are being bombed, and you see that they're able to, just like in the Kurds of Syria, to, in a way, make their area free first. Doesn't mean that they would go all the way to Tehran, but because they're organized and they have weapons. The other weapons are there for the Iranian army, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the army. Iran has conscription. It means that Iranians, you go to the military. The military is not as strong as the Revolutionary Guard, where the guardians of the revolution, who are the loyal force of the revolution, but there is also a military. And it may be that there are going to be people that we will see who will announce defection and who have some capability to actually do something against the loyal force of the Revolutionary Guards. I don't think we will end up seeing a US-Israeli invasion of taking the palace. Although, I'm not a prophet, and we've seen a lot of surprises. But if somebody is going to take these people out, then it needs to be people from within. The message from President Trump, and even from the Israelis to the demonstrators, says, listen, sit, wait, your time will come. We're going to see a phase 2 of this. We're going to still see the war on the streets. And again, there may be the sort of 2 scenarios and a hybrid scenario in between. Scenario number 1 is the attempt to create a Venezuela type of a model. We are stopping this. There is a bit of a capitulation and an attempt to create a transitional system under the forces of the old regime, but taking the people already, the majority of them were taken out. So we're going to have part of the old system, not with the worst people, and who will promise to create a transitional process. And we'll see if that's going to be acceptable or not. Or we're going to have people who are marching in the streets trying to take them out. The hybrid model will be an attempt to really force them to really do a transition that will have the possibility of creating a different process in Iran. So the transition will be that the whole system may remain, but that the broader trajectory is not to leave the wilayat al-faqih, that's the religious leadership, but really to have a transition process that may keep some of the old systems intact to keep the country functioning, but it will open the country and will not leave it as the Islamic republic, which is really a system that is highly authoritative, highly religious, and that is controlled by a very small group of people with a very radical vision.
And my last question, personal, and then we open. And I thank Kim, IJKL, and the Federation for bringing you here so I can ask you this question that is deep in my heart. In the Jewish tradition, we have this term that we are going to hear in Pesach too, Ein la davar sof. This appears that doesn't have an end, right? Every couple of months, every couple of years, all the same players or different players, different names, but the same happens again. Yesterday morning, Israel says all the towns south of the Litani River in Lebanon, evacuate. We have been hearing that since 1982. The threat of Iran since the 80s. The Palestinians, different terrorist groups throughout the ages with different leaders. Okay, Hamas is the newest one, but we have older ones. The same in Iraq, the same in Iran, the same in different places. And many of us that are optimistic by nature, we think this will be the last one. Okay, maybe we thought the same in June, right? The war in June, this will be the last war and there will be a change. Many people that were also optimistic, let's say in Venezuela, or regime change from Chavez from the last 30 years, and they say, but it's the same people. Ein la davar sof, this will never have an end or a foreseeable end, or this could be the war that ends all the wars in that region. And I will add one more question to that. There was a time that usually countries or people surrender. The Japanese surrender, the Nazis surrender. Apparently there's something that changed in the world, ideology, fanaticism, social media, that people, countries, these people in power are not able to surrender even though that you show to the world that you can completely obliterate. So can you win a war when capitulation is not an option?
Beautiful question, Rabbi. And let me, if I can, start perhaps with a bit of a Jewish answer, or at least something that I've used in one of my latest articles, on this, reflecting on really, not the state of the world, but also the state of the world. The 7 days of creation, one of the first lessons that we learn from God creates the world. He creates different components of the world. In the third day, it says Tov Me'od, and then everything is just about perfect until when? Until we are created. Soon enough, we're understanding that when man and woman, and then the snakes gets involved, and we realize that things are not that smooth. When the first brothers kill each other, and we understand that the man's inclination can be evil from creation, we ask ourselves, and many have commented on this theologically, why is it that we were created with something that rather than keeping the creation, we have an instinct to try to destroy it? But the lesson continues. The first time people gather together, one of the first things they try to do is to build a tower and in a way occupy God. And then we learn that God divided us into nations and people and languages, and we realize that we are in a state of conflict. The world is going to be destroyed again with the flood. And we realize that we have a real existential, consequential, and also a spiritual challenge. How we create the world and where we, as part of our mission, would have to enshrine and keep the creation rather than destroy it and destroy each other. But this lesson is actually acute when it comes to history, when it comes to international relations. It's not just theology, because the world then understands that it needs to create systems in order to keep security, in order to keep people from killing each other. In 1648, in the Treaty of Westphalia, when the first notion of state was created, ending the 30 years of war in Europe, we had the first time when you said, well, we have these principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, where basically a bit of divide and conquer, and then we create a balance of power. That continues because states are created, United League of Nations, United Nations, less than perfect systems for sure, but they are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to figure out an international system that will prevent us from killing each other. In the Middle East, this system is failing more so in the last 15 years. And certainly with the beginning of the Arab Spring. The key, the focal point in this comes in 2014. When the head of ISIS, Abu Muhammad al-Baghdadi, stands in a speech and says, we have a caliphate. There's some territory that once used to be Iraq, once used to be Syria, it doesn't really matter. The sovereignty does not really matter. We are here. It takes the world more than 5 years to try to put an end to it. And then we're seeing failed states. And then we're seeing the fact that all of these proxies that Iran has been very much a part of them has been at the core of this. Because as I mentioned, it was the core of October 7 because the Iranian ring was the one who created a lot of this lack of stability. And part of that was the idea of, if I were to, because I was asked at some point to try to explain, is there a US strategy here? And I said, well, one interesting principle is, let's make it a state again. We need to return state order. Because in Gaza, we can only potentially try to return state order if groups like Hamas is not there. And in Lebanon, the same thing with Hezbollah. And in Syria, it's not exactly the same principle, but the main idea is that we need to get the detractors out of there and the extremists out of there, and we try to bring the system into the center with a bit of a power sharing. And in Yemen, the same. We got to get these proxies out. We got to get back to state order in order to keep stability. So El Davar Sof is true to an extent when you look at it now, but if you take this broader history, I'm not going
It's
to
one of the
promise you-
kids. They'll be upset if I take it out, but I'd like to take it out.
Don't worry. We're not, I'm not going to promise you that this may be the last war, but I want you to come back to the point I've made before with the 75 years and the difference between the 1948 and the 2023 war. And the fact that the Israeli-Arab conflict is in a very different place. And the fact that if I were to now go country by country, and some of these things I know personally, we have been having conversations with Lebanese, including Shia leaders from Lebanon that we've never had. For the first time in 40 years, Israelis and Lebanese were meeting officially. For the first time in 40 years, Israelis and Syrians are speaking officially. And of course, that was already before, in the last few years, Israelis and Saudis and the Indonesians. I will tell you this line. From 1948, when Israel was created, until the beginning of the Arab Spring, you can count on one hand the number of Syrians ever to have been in Israel. I can count on many more hands the number of Syrians who have been to our Shabbat table in Jerusalem. I can add to that Pakistanis and Indonesians and Saudis and many, many others. And that's also something that is a part of the last few years. It's a part of the cycle of the Abraham Accords. This does not mean that it's going to be the last war, but it means, and with this I'll end, that if I'm coming back to the theological question, that perhaps we are trying to hear something in the context of Le'orda or Le'shobra. How do we have the ability to protect, to work, to preserve the creation for the land that was given to us? Because Iran has been the focal point of most of the conflicts, certainly involved in Israel, but broadly in the Middle East. And if we're going to have a change there, we have a chance of alignment. That alignment should not come with kinetics. It should rely on some of these relationships. And if I were to give you a different lecture, and if we're not now in the middle of the war, I could tell you fascinating stories of meetings that seems to have been impossible until the past few years, but they were very much possible. And with this, we can open it and hopefully in a more optimistic note.
Amen. So let's do 7 questions. Okay, we have been talking about the 7 enemies in 1948, the 7 enemies in the last Gaza war. So let's take another Jewish symbolic number 7 questions from everybody who is in person or online too, that they can open the mic, and maybe Jackie can organize whoever is online. Maybe they can write a message and you can open the questions. And we are going to follow this, the idea of Pirkei Avot. Shoel le'inyan u'mashiv ka'alacha. We ask to the point and Nir answers to the point, okay? In one leg. Very good. Okay, who will be the first one? Nachshon.
Thank you very much for enlightening us. Secondly, the average Iranian person, what do they see? I'm sorry, the average Iranian person, who do they see as their next leader?
So, I'm not sure if there is, in that sense, an average Iranian person and a consensus on the next leader. That was the question. And borrowing from Eric Hoffer, was in the book, the very famous book, The True Believer, speaks about in order for a mass movement to emerge, you don't necessarily need to have a God, but it's essential to have a devil. I think the Iranians are probably more in agreement about the fact that they want change. Many of them, we have seen, certainly in the media, highlighted the fact that some of them were chanting the name of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. But I think some of that was chanted because it's a symbol of change, not necessarily because they vouch for him. After all, many of the Iranians inside, they know him in a sense because he has been around and they've seen him more so in social media, but he was never there. He spent all these years of the revolution in the United States, and they're not necessarily able to necessarily bring the change. So that question is still up for answers. I think many of the Iranians will say to you, let's get these people out and let's try to get a transition in. Many of the liberal oppositions, and you hear on that voice, are saying that what we want is a transitional process. Meaning even the Prince Pahlavi is saying there are some principles. We want to make sure that Iran remains intact. We don't want to see separatists. We want to have human rights, respect, etc. And we want to see a transitional process. So we're going to have a system that is going to be more of a republic and less of an Islamic republic. And hopefully we'll get some more clarity on this, but I think that this is the phase that will begin to be more intensified once the planes will stop flying.
So now let's go online for people who are on Zoom. Is anybody had a question over there? Or Nir?
Rabbi, I have a question.
We are all ears.
Okay, my question is this. The Shiite clerics have a religious perspective on reality and believe that God is on their side and that they are serving God by the atrocious acts that they've done over the years, and that they're fighting against the great Satan and all that kind of stuff. And I guess my concern is that with that kind of mentality, that weapons of mass destruction would be a reasonable thing to use if they believe that they are in danger of being exterminated, or if there's some existential threat to their rule. Can you confirm that that is in fact a legitimate concern?
Well, it is very much a legitimate concern, and it's actually what prompted a very significant dynamic from the JCPOA in 2015 and all the way to the different kinetic activities, Mossad activities, assassinations of nuclear scientists, and the 12 Days War, where the United States and Israel had bombed some of the nuclear sites in Iran. This has been a major concern because this is considered an existential threat. This actually what had driven most of this dynamic. And part of what we're seeing here is let's try to resolve this issue once and for all, not just by eliminating the nuclear sites or the missile sites, but by changing the system that created them. So this has really been in the heart of all of this. And that's something that's going to continue to evolve in any transitional system.
I think that Dan's question is, when they realize in 1 week, in 2 weeks, that there's no way that the regime can survive, if they are able today to press the red button.
Well, they are able to press the red button, but we have taken their ability to shoot. They're to the best of our knowledge, and I think I can say that with a degree of certainty, they do not have the capacity to launch a weapon of mass destruction, and that has to do with the long kinetic process, a diplomatic process that had prevented them from having that capability.
One question here, yes.
Okay, Qatar, I know they signed the Abraham Accords, but it's pretty much open knowledge that Qatar is one of the biggest financiers of the movement in United States universities to convince students to want to wipe Israel off the map. And with Qatar being attacked by Iran, do you see that having any effect on their behavior?
This is a very interesting angle. First of all, just to clarify, Qatar did not sign the Abraham Accords. The United Arab Emirates did. Qatar did not. Qatar was in the 1990s the place where an Israeli diplomatic trade mission was actually existed. It served as a very important hub. Qatar do let Israelis enter. They host some conferences and they open the door for Israelis. Qatar has been very involved in whatever happened in Gaza. Some of that is a chapter of the Israeli Commission of Inquiry on October 7, because Qatar has been involved in a way that allowed some people in Israel to say everything is good, Qatar is in control, Hamas is actually being hosted in Qatar, and therefore everything is safe. Qatar's strategy, very small country, really 300,000 Qataris, but with a lot of money. So they are positioning themselves as playing in a way all sides. They're more connected ideologically, not to the Iranian camp of the Shias, but more to the Sunni Ikhwani, the Muslim Brotherhood camp. So they've been playing, although being allies of the United States, they have very much played with radicals, Sunnis. And you are absolutely correct. They have been very much involved, actually, in almost every place in the world. When we see an anti-Israel movement, a structural movement, behind it there is a Qatari signature. And I've had some discussions about this with the Qataris. They're trying to say, minimize their, it's a free country. Just this is how it works. But with their media channels, with Al Jazeera, they're causing a lot of damage. Part of what they attempted to do is to defend themselves by, on the one hand, being ideological, then having a relationship with both sides. They were trying to mediate with Hamas and in the war, and some Israelis and captured families are actually thanking them because they played a certain role in trying to get some of the hostages out. But with all of this, they said, listen, we are going to protect ourselves by having an American base, having a relationship with Hamas, having relationships, even if needed to be with Iran, and then we're going to be untouchable. And all of a sudden, last year, they kind of realized, wait a minute, Israelis just bombed us, or really bombed Hamas on our soil, and because of this dynamic, eventually, the Iranians just bombed us. Okay, they bombed the American base, but they bombed us as well, and now we're not invincible. And now they actually changed course a little bit and began to attack Iran. They were not just fighting against it, also they took down 2 planes. Whether this will change their overall orientation, again, some of that is ideological. I don't think it's going to change so quickly, but perhaps they would realize something. And part of that has to do also with what this country would do, because Qatar is considered an ally, and it's considered an ally despite all the radical voices that they support. I think we need to put them on the pedestal and continue to show their involvement. Last year we had a very interesting case. You mentioned Qatari support universities. There were $5 billion of support a year. They supported the campus of Texas A&M, and they put the campus of Texas A&M in Qatar. The way they do it over there, they don't bring the entire university there. They bring 1 or 2 departments. Which department they chose to bring? AI and nuclear physics. They opened it to who? To Iranian students. Eventually, there was another interesting Israeli campaign that they were able to expose that and get the university to get shut down. But they are dangerous. They need to be held accountable. I very much hope that this particular dynamic now will be able to create additional alignment in the region, including Ukraine.
Somebody online for the fourth question?
Yeah, I have a question, Rabbi Uri and Nir. It's more about domestic American reaction to this. I had the unfortunate experience of watching the aptly named Secretary of War this morning talk about this. He seems to have a lot of glee in death and destruction, more like a teenage boy playing a video game. And I think they're doing a lot of harm to the interests of actually America fighting and Israel and Jews. How do we handle that?
So the question was, how do we handle over militarism approach? He was referring to some statements of Secretary Haxett. Look, I believe that truth usually needs to be found in the middle. And you know, it's not my place to comment on the American leadership and the ability or the credibility of those who were installed there with all the experiments they had, either in military affairs or in commenting on television on military affairs, and how we need to handle them. Usually we say that all politics is local. So part of that, I think, is catering to the cohort of support. And I think that somebody who is accustomed to media and to speaking to the core, that's probably the nature of the statements. And that's partially, I think, what we're seeing here. The interesting thing is that when you sit in Washington with some of the people beyond the politicians, the people who are designing strategies, I think you see a little bit more wisdom. I mentioned before that we need to find the balance point between kinetics and diplomacy. At this point, we're still very much at the kinetic phase. We're bombing. I hope that once the momentum will be reached, we can figuring out how the change will be. And over there, again, it's not going to be enough to bomb another target. Hopefully, I would say, we're maybe getting there. I mean, the fact that B-52s are participating in these very old planes that are susceptible, that are relatively easily can be taken down from the sky, it means that the air defenses of Iran are weak enough, so it's safe, relatively safe, to bring these planes that can do a lot of damage on board.
So we said 7, but for the sake of time, we are going to do 5, another Jewish number that is the Torah, and I'm sure that Nir will enlighten us if we want, if there's the will of all of us to keep learning from his wisdom to have another meeting soon. Okay, so a last one, and I never want to be the one that decides. Kim, you want to decide?
I want to take all the questions together and
okay, all the questions together. Let's try to sum up. Very short.
Thank you for being here. I wish I understood more. Why Saturday?
Why Saturday, the first one? Why Shabbat?
My question becomes, vis-a-vis, what is the effect of the internal politics on Netanyahu and the Israelis?
okay.
So we have why they attack on Saturday, why October 7th Saturday, why this Saturday, why everything happened on Saturday, then what happened with Bibi and the internal elections, and the last one, and I will pick up your question.
Could I ask you, how long continue this tactical barrage in the area, but then you were saying that so many different factions have weapons, and I'm like, okay, how do you play wacko from the Israeli and American point of view?
Okay, I'll answer those three. The timing on Saturday was chosen really because of a particular opportunity, operational opportunity that came, that created a window of opportunity to act. There was an ongoing plan, and you have seen it in slow motion in the speed of the American and airplane carriers that came into the region. There was a lot of planning. There were some scenarios for starting this on Wednesday and on Thursday, and there were some good reasons to postpone. But when there was a realization that there's going to be an opportunity, an operational opportunity to take the leadership in a particular time because there was intelligence that led to it, that was the reason why it was chosen for Saturday, and that was the launching point, and a very effective one. So it wasn't the symbolic of the day, it was simply the moment of time of the intelligence. The significance for Netanyahu, most probably, is a net positive. Netanyahu has been speaking about the Iranian threat for 40 years. We have so many pictures of him coming to the United Nations with pictures of bombs. Israel has spent significant resources, energy, trying to sabotage the Iranian military and nuclear program, trying to open channels with the opposition groups, and trying to push for that change. This is, as Netanyahu said, in many ways his life project. It may, some even I hear, provide a pedestal for him to afterwards says, listen, I've done what I needed to do, now I can go, we can close all the legal issues and close that chapter. It's very, very, very significant. But certainly if he's going to elections now, so far, it probably is a net positive. And in terms of the guacamole game, that's the game that we were playing ever since October 7th. And I mentioned these 7 fronts that were not Arabs, that were Iranian proxies. And Hamas is trapped, and as Rabbi Uri said, they were not part of it. They hardly have any capabilities. They can occasionally do an ambush or going from a tunnel that was not discovered, but that's the extent of what they're able to do. Hezbollah is able to participate, but now they're getting more opposition from Lebanon and the Lebanese army. And of course, Israel is used that in order to further do guacamole and to take them down. The Houthis have also been deterred, damaged, so they were not participating. It is true that for the first time we had Hezbollah and Iran able to work together, but the number of missiles that Iran has is still, again, weaker. So in terms of the guacamole kind of scenario, Israel has actually have had the upper hand, and we, with the proxies that were weakened, now we need to go back to this notion of, again, making the states again, bringing Lebanon to the Lebanese, bringing Gaza or the Palestinians into groups that are more mainstream, different than Hamas. Syria began to march in this direction, the topic of a different lecture, but we may have a chance there. And hopefully from all of this carnage, we may be able to actually, we have the at least possibility to create a new axis of hope.
So thank you, Nir. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing us. Why not? You want to conclude?
Thank you, our presenters. Our thanks to Rabbi Uri Romano. Thank you, Dr. Nir Boms. Okay, that helps as well. We are actually going to be having a follow-up Zoom with Dr. Boms. And if you register for this, then you'll automatically get a notification of that. And you'll get a recording of this, which is always a good idea to register things. And if you didn't, please check out the IJKL connections, which will have all of that. One other event to bring to your notice is March 21st, Saturday evening at 7:15 p.m. at Temple Beth in Margate, just a few minutes away from here. IJKL will be presenting Yoel Sykes, a phenomenal musician, part of Nava Tequila, which are a group known throughout the world. It's a complimentary Havdalah concert. What you need to do again is to register with IJKL, and please join us for all of the courses, not least of which is a Wednesday morning at 10:30 every week, right here with myself. And we look forward to welcoming you. And we're so happy that you came to Temple Beth in Coral Springs.
And with this, we conclude the meeting. Bye-bye, whoever is online.